Welcome. This podcast is an introduction to dyslexia. The goal of the podcast is to answer the following questions. What is dyslexia? What are the deficits associated with dyslexia? How do the brains of those with dyslexia process language? And what are effective interventions for those with dyslexia? The podcast is organized into 4 sections to help us answer these 4 questions. Part 1. What is dyslexia? Many people mistakenly believe that dyslexia is a visual problem. The first thing that most people think of when they hear the word dyslexia is reversals, or seeing letters or words backward, such as seeing a B as a D, or seeing the word was as saw. Most children make reversals of letters and words as they learn to read and write. Children with dyslexia may do this longer, but this is just a result of overall slower literacy development, and that does not indicate that they see the letters or words any differently from other children. Another misconception is that those with dyslexia see letters, words, or sentences dancing around on the page, or that text seems blurry. In reality, most people with dyslexia see letters and words just the same as everyone else. Dyslexia is not a problem with visual acuity, perception, or processing. So, what is it? Let's think about the origin of the word dyslexia, one part at a time. Dys means not, lack of, impairment, abnormal, or difficulty. Lexia means words, language, or reading. So, dyslexia can be thought of simply as a significant difficulty in reading. The International Dyslexia Association, or IDA, is the largest organization that promotes research, education, and advocacy related to dyslexia. The IDA defines dyslexia as a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin, and that is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition, and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language. This means that connections between letters and sounds may seem arbitrary, which makes it difficult to automatically recognize common letter patterns. Take a moment to read this passage. How was that? Frustrating? This was a simulation of what an individual with dyslexia experiences while reading text. If you're able to accurately and automatically recognize letter-sound correspondences and common letter patterns, reading text is a much easier task. Because dyslexia is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or automatic word recognition, decoding becomes slow and laborious. This slow and laborious decoding rate makes it difficult to comprehend text, because too much cognitive effort is spent on decoding. Since dyslexia results from difficulties in processing the phonological component of language, those with dyslexia also experience difficulty with spelling and spell words phonetically, like B-R-I-K for brick. After that first section, you should be able to define dyslexia and identify some common misconceptions associated with dyslexia. Pause the video now to take notes and to review any of the previous section that you might still be confused about. Then continue when you're ready to move on to the next section. Part 2. What are the deficits associated with dyslexia? At the core of dyslexia is a phonological processing deficit. This means that those with dyslexia have difficulty processing the sound system of language, which may include deficits in phonological awareness, or the conscious awareness of the various sound units within spoken language, including syllables, intrasyllabic units, and individual sounds. Phonemic awareness, which is the capacity to manipulate individual sounds. or phonological memory, which is the ability to store phonological information in working or short-term memory. For example, if I asked you to say the word cat and then to say the word cat without the k, what word would you have? Of course, you would be left with the word at. Although this may seem like a simple task, it can be difficult for those with dyslexia because this task involves processing and manipulating the sound of language separate from meaning. The second deficit associated with dyslexia is a naming speed deficit, or difficulties in rapidly naming objects, colors, numbers, or letters. Problems in naming speed are often associated with more global problems in developing automaticity, especially automatizing novel tasks. Rapid automatic naming, or RAN, can be measured with a 1-minute timing of naming abilities. This can include naming just about anything, but the ability to rapidly name letters is most closely related to reading ability. Many researchers suggest that there are different degrees of reading disability and different levels of processing impairment. Less severe reading difficulties are characterized by either a phonological processing deficit or rapid naming problems, although it's important to note that very few people have only a naming speed deficit. The more severe forms of dyslexia have deficits in both phonological processing and rapid naming. This is known as a double deficit. These processing difficulties are more widespread than you would think. In fact, dyslexia has been found to affect 1 in 5 people. It has also been found to run in families. It's common for children who have a parent with a reading disability to experience the same difficulties with reading. About 40% of siblings of those with dyslexia are affected themselves. Another common misconception is that more boys than girls have dyslexia. However, research has found that the incidence in boys and girls is actually about the same. Dyslexia has been found to be present in all cultures and languages in the world that have a written language, so it doesn't only affect those who speak English. It has also commonly been thought that those with dyslexia will outgrow it. However, there is no evidence to support this. There is evidence that shows that those with dyslexia continue to experience difficulty reading into adolescence and adulthood. At this point, you should be able to describe the deficits associated with dyslexia and explain the prevalence of dyslexia. Pause the video now to take notes and to review any of the previous section that you might still be confused about. Then continue when you're ready to move on to the next section. Part 3. How do the brains of those with dyslexia process language? More and more research is being conducted to investigate how our brains process language, what happens in our brains during reading, and how the brains of those with dyslexia differ from other brains. So here's what we found out so far. You probably already know that the human brain can be divided into 2 hemispheres. Among other things, the left hemisphere is responsible for speech, language processing, and reading. The right hemisphere is generally in charge of spatial activities and nonverbal tasks. Several parts of the brain contribute to the processes involved in reading. Broca's area is located in the frontal lobe of the brain, usually in the left hemisphere. This area, also known as the inferior frontal gyrus, is important for organization, production, and manipulation of language and speech. Wernicke's area is also involved in language. Damage to this area of the brain in the form of a stroke or traumatic brain injury can result in loss of ability to comprehend language. Some people with damage in this area of the brain can speak words clearly, but they are unable to properly put them together in a meaningful way. This area is also known as the parieto-temporal region, which is involved in word analysis or the conscious decoding of words. This region is critical in the processing of letter-sound correspondences necessary for decoding, as well as for comprehending written and spoken language. Together, these 2 areas form a neural loop to control language. The occipitotemporal region, located toward the back of the brain, is critical for automatic responses that skilled readers use for rapid word recognition. These responses are necessary for developing reading fluency. Research using functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, has found structural differences in the brains of those with and without dyslexia, and found that the brains of those with dyslexia rely more on the right hemisphere and frontal lobe than those without dyslexia. Because of this difference, reading takes longer to process in the brains of those with dyslexia, making reading more difficult. The picture on the left depicts the amount of activation required for processing that is not yet automatic. The picture on the right shows activation during performance of an automatic skill. The brains of those with dyslexia have to work much harder to read because they have difficulty automatizing the processes involved in reading. All of this is not to say that those with dyslexia cannot improve their reading. It is a common misconception that those with dyslexia can never learn to read, but this is simply not true. Individuals with dyslexia rely more on effective instruction, and the task of reading is likely to always require them more effort. So, what are effective interventions for those with dyslexia? Intensive multisensory reading interventions have been found to be successful at improving the reading ability of those with dyslexia. Multisensory interventions break down language using a carefully sequenced structure, linking eye, ear, voice, and hand, to strengthen their learning of the structure of language. This assists readers in using the left hemisphere of their brains more efficiently when they're reading, which ultimately leads to improved reading ability. There are a variety of vision-based treatments, such as eye patches, colored text overlays, or colored lenses, that claim to help those with dyslexia, but there is not sufficient evidence to support this. Because we now know that dyslexia is a result of difficulty with phonological processing rather than visual processing, it's clear that, to be effective, interventions must address the phonological deficit. The bottom line is this: don't fall for marketing pitches and glitzy packaging. It's important to select interventions that have a strong research base with evidence of their effectiveness for improving the reading abilities of those with dyslexia. After that section, you should be able to describe how the brains of those with dyslexia process language and identify reading intervention methods that have been found to be effective for those with dyslexia. Pause here to think about the content addressed in the podcast and to review anything you may have missed. We hope that this podcast has helped you better understand dyslexia. Thank you for watching.